ready to start? All right, distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good day or evening, everyone. We are delighted to see you all. I am Darlene Pajarito, the Justice Systems Director of ASEAN-ACT, logging in from the Philippines. To co-moderate this webinar is ASEAN Program Director Archimedes Siguan. Welcome to the 10th ASEAN-ACT webinar series on adoptive justice responses on trafficking in persons under the new normal. More than 800 registered in this webinar. For some webinar house rules, let us watch this video.
Hello, thank you for joining us today. We would like to make this virtual event a pleasing and productive experience. To make this happen, the organizers request all participants to observe the following house rules. Display your full name and office. Please use the chat function to provide comments and the Q&A box to ask questions. The moderator will then read and direct questions to the panel. For documentation purposes, this event will be recorded and shared on our ASEAN-ACT Partnership Hub portal. Translation is available by clicking on the Interpretation button and choosing your preferred language. At the end of the event, please take a few minutes to fill out the feedback form. As we are in a virtual environment, we will be kind to one another in case of internet connection issues. We will expect unavoidable technical difficulties. Feel free to join back if you're disconnected. Everyone's patience will be greatly appreciated. Thank you for your attention.
All right, all the speakers will present in English except for Director Ratchapon, who will be presenting in Thai. Please click on the desired interpretation channel to listen to our speakers. We have customized channel for English, Cambodia, Bahasa Indonesia, Myanmar, Thai, and Vietnamese. But if you want to listen in Lao, please choose the Spanish channel for translation. The Zoom recording, this is being recorded. So this recording, the PowerPoint presentations, and other materials from this webinar will be uploaded in our ASEAN-ACT portal. I will post that link to our portal a little bit or in a while. Now to formally open the webinar and deliver the welcome and keynote remarks, we are very pleased to have Australian Mission to the ASEAN Acting Councillor, Daniel Seaver. You have the floor, Councillor Daniel.
Many thanks, Darlene. I'm very pleased to have the floor. Can I please confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Wonderful.
you very clear.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Actually, this is my 10th webinar. I realize I've attended all of them.
Wow.
So that's got to be something, doesn't it? Counter-trafficking partners, practitioners, advocates, and other distinguished colleagues from around the ASEAN region and beyond. Welcome to the final ASEAN-Australia Counter-Trafficking webinar for 2021. We sincerely thank you for your interest in our webinar series throughout the year, which explored adaptive justice responses to trafficking in persons. We covered topics ranging from the role of women as change agents and leaders in the counter-trafficking sector, to the very pressing need to understand and better address online child sexual exploitation. And we're excited to close this year with a thought-provoking topic that centers around victims of trafficking and their rights to reflection, recovery, and transition to a life beyond trafficking and exploitation. I would like to warmly welcome our esteemed speakers, Ms. Archana Koteka, founder and CEO of Remedy Project Hong Kong SAR, Dr. Marcelina Carpizo, Tanglo Buhay Center, Katiling Ban Sa Kalambuan organization of the Zamboanga City in the Philippines, Dinty Min Chau, Director of Psychology Services, Blue Dragon Children Foundation, Hanoi, Vietnam, and Director Ratchapon Manilek. It's been almost 2 years since COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic by the World Health Organization in March 2020. While we've all adjusted to the new COVID normal, the emergence of new variants, most recently Omicron, will continue to challenge the resilience of our societies and economies and put pressure on our health and social systems. In this context, we can expect the victims of trafficking and those at risk of being trafficked to continue to be vulnerable in the foreseeable future. Vulnerable groups, including women and children, migrant workers, irregular migrants, stateless and conflict-affected populations, and people with disabilities will continue to be susceptible to online and offline exploitation for financial gain. These groups will continue to experience difficulties in accessing adequate healthcare, housing, and social protection as the income gap and inequalities in the region continue to grow. For those who find themselves victims of trafficking, there is currently a slim chance they will be identified and supported to recover and reintegrate back into society, and an even more remote chance they will be compensated for the significant material and non-material damage caused by trafficking. This webinar series has aimed to bring together those committed to reversing the plight of trafficked victims and those vulnerable to trafficking. ASEAN-ACT has deliberately chosen topics that respond to our evolving context and selected speakers with expert knowledge and experience in innovative and effective responses to preventing, detecting, investigating, resolving trafficking cases. Whilst counter-trafficking is extremely challenging and the crime itself continues to adapt and evolve, the problem is not insurmountable. There's a growing body of evidence and emerging community of practice on how to prevent our responses to trafficking, including the protection of victims. Our understanding of the drivers of trafficking and why it persists is also improving. Our 10th and final webinar series in this series focuses on recovering from trafficking, approaches to supporting victims of trafficking to reflect, recover, and reintegrate into a safe and supportive community. This topic today is fitting as we observe 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This is a global campaign which runs annually from 25 November, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, until the 10th of December, which is also Human Rights Day. This year, Human Rights Day is particularly significant as it marks the 17th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a milestone document that sets out the fundamental and inalienable rights of every human being, regardless of race, color, religion, sex, language, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. As you're all well aware, trafficking in persons is a gross human rights violation, which strips victims of their dignity, freedom, and control over their own lives. Violations of human rights are both the cause and a consequence of trafficking in persons, making the promotion and protection of human rights particularly relevant to the fight against trafficking. Victims of trafficking have experienced various forms of trauma and abuse, and the risk of them being re-traumatized or further victimized is high. A key dimension of fulfilling the human rights of victims of trafficking includes the provision of a sufficient period of time to reflect and recover from their experience before making an informed decision about whether to assist and cooperate in criminal proceedings. The importance of the review and reflection period is recognised by the UNODC Global Plan of Action to Combat TIP as an important counter-trafficking measure globally. It is widely acknowledged that victims should be provided the opportunity to reflect on their experience and process their thoughts and feelings without the pressure of criminalisation, detention, or deportation. Victims also require individualised care and support, which is tailored to their needs and unique experience. During today's webinar, we will discuss the importance of the review and reflection period for victims of trafficking and share good practices from within and beyond the ASEAN region. Whilst ASEAN member states are yet to mandate a recovery and reflection period for victims of trafficking through legislation, there are victim-centred practices emerging that respect the rights of victims and recognise their individual needs and preferences. With our excellent panel of speakers, I have no doubt that we will have a robust discussion today on the laws, policies and practices that can be introduced to improve the implementation of the reflection and recovery period, which ultimately results in victims more willing and better equipped to cooperate with authorities and participate in legal proceedings. More importantly, however, it maximises the prospects for victims to fully recover and reintegrate into a safe and supportive community. And on a final note, I must raise Australia's grave concerns about the situation in Myanmar. Australia supports ASEAN's crucial role in responding to the situation. ASEAN-led efforts represent tangible steps towards ending the violence and a commencement of dialogue between all parties concerned. We reiterate the importance of the full and timely implementation of the 5 points of consensus, agreed by ASEAN leaders and the leader of Myanmar's military in April, and we call for the immediate release of those arbitrarily detained, including Professor Sean Turnell. On behalf of the Australian Government, thank you for your participation in this webinar, and I look forward to an insightful discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Danielle, for the warm welcome. It has certainly set a positive mood, and we are all excited to hear from our panelists. Now, the group photo, always a favorite session. May we request everyone to put on your camera, please? Cam will give us the cue.
Thank you so much, Darlene. All right, thank you so much to our panelists. And Daniel, this is my only job in this webinar, so I better do this right. Okay, kindly look at your camera in 3, 2, and there you go. And another one. This time, may I please ask our panelists and Daniel to wave, and Lucia as well. 3, 2, and there you go. Perfect. Thank you. And back to you, Darlene.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Cam. Thank you, everyone, for the big smiles. Before we dive into the discussion, may I share with you very briefly some great feedbacks from the previous webinar conducted last November 12 about vulnerability and trafficking in persons. Okay. All right. 96% said that the topic was relevant to their work and that the speakers were knowledgeable. And 95% said that they learned something new, while 94% said that the webinar was very useful. Now, we took some notes of comments and suggestions as well, particularly from an immigration officer who mentioned that he found the webinar discussion very useful and will echo it to his colleagues. And a suggestion to provide a sample of actual cases on how prosecutors succeeded in securing a conviction. Very well noted on that suggestion when we conduct more webinars next year on related topics. So thank you for sharing your comments and suggestions, as we really value your thoughts so we can improve our format better and serve you as key actors in the counter trafficking in persons field. This is why we also request you to please help us complete the feedback survey from this webinar. At the end of the webinar, the link is in the chat box, and you will also receive a certificate of attendance for your records upon the completion of the survey. We will be posting that every now and then in the chat box, the feedback link. All right. On our topic today, as Daniel has mentioned, on recovering from trafficking, approaches to supporting victims of trafficking to reflect, recover, and reintegrate into a safe and supportive community. We hope to have more clarity on the concept of reflection and recovery period, its purpose and value, what are the approaches, strategies, good practices, including the challenges in the implementation of the reflection and recovery period as an effective humanitarian measure in protecting victims of trafficking. Before we invite our first speaker on the floor, let us take a poll and where you can share your thoughts on the issue. There are only 3 questions. ASEAN-ACT will not use these polls for any other purpose. It is just to get the pulse and what you feel about the topic. As you can see on the screen, it is now displayed. There are only 3 questions. May I read for purposes of translation? Poll question number 1, a reflection period grants traffic victims time to process the experience and whether to participate in any proceedings. What do you think is a reasonable period or duration for a reflection period? Less than 1 month to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 months to 1 year, not less than 1 year. Poll question number 2. In your view, should the provision of protective measures and assistance to traffic victims be conditioned on their cooperation to give evidence or statement? Yes, no, somewhat. All right. I think the poll question number 3 is does not reflect, but anyway, we'll just stick to these 2 poll questions for now. And please take time to just click. It'll just take few seconds and you're done. We'll present the results of the polls after the presentation of our speakers. All right, I guess that is enough time. We'll now proceed to the main part of this webinar. Our first speaker is a counter-trafficking expert and activist with extensive experience in the areas of advocacy, policy work, and case work relating to trafficking in persons. She's a UK qualified barrister and London School of Economics graduate who started her career practicing corporate law for 7 years, after which she joined the UN Refugee Agency Legal Protection Team in London and subsequently the Immigration Advisory Service and Stop Trafficking UK, also in London. Following a move to Hong Kong, she joined Liberty Asia as head of legal. Her work with Liberty Asia involved running several regional projects, disrupting activities of traffickers by improving human trafficking visibility within financial institutions, educating NGOs and lawyers on anti-trafficking legal frameworks and victim identification, including extensive engagement with financial institutions, regulators, and other corporations with a view to improving human rights due diligence processes. She has been named as one of the top 10 innovative lawyers in Asia Pacific by the Financial Times Asia in 2017. An IVLP alumni, let us all welcome the founder and CEO of Remedy Project, Ms. Archiana Cotecha. You have the floor, Ms. Archiana.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Darlene, and thank you for the very warm welcome and introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I will start to share my screen so we can get talking about this very important topic. So hopefully you can all see my screen. Now, a reflection and recovery period is exactly as it says. It's very common to see a reflection and recovery period in the context of a national referral mechanism. So if you think about the UK and some other jurisdictions in the EU, it's very common to see that there is a national referral mechanism. And as part of the whole referral and identification process, the victim is given a period of time. This usually happens after the initial contact with the presumed victim. And the idea is that for a period of time, which actually varies from country to country, the victim is given an opportunity to recover from their experiences, to receive information about their options, and to make an informed decision about whether they want to be collaborating with the authorities and to assist them with their criminal inquiries. During this period, the individual is also is entitled to actually have access to protection and support services to support them. And that is primarily the object of a reflection and recovery period. This was first actually put down in law in Article 13 of the European Convention against trafficking in human beings. But now having a reflection and recovery period is actually recognized as international good practice. So it's recommended by the OECD, the Bali process, by the UNICEF, UNODC, and OSCE as well. In some countries, not in others, we tend to see it enshrined in the national laws. And however, it is common practice in many countries to have some kind of a reflection and recovery period, but it's not really something which is set down in the law. And that in itself presents some problems because the practice then tends to be quite variable, especially where there is no clear definition of what is a reflection and recovery period. When does it start? When does it end? In the course of that time, what are the entitlements of individuals who are presumed to be victims? In particular, where we see difficulties in this space is where authorities often use this period of time to pressure victims or to interview them or to get evidence from victims as to whether there is a good enough case for prosecution or in order to further the identification process. Now, the purpose of the reflection and recovery period is to be very victim-centric and to allow individuals the time to reflect, to recover, and to access services. It's not really for them to be responding to queries from the authorities or to be pressured into collaborating with the authorities. Unfortunately, this is something we see a lot of in practice. So some of the international best practice, which is actually relevant for everybody, is that it is important for a reflection and recovery period to be universal. So it applies to all. It does not discriminate between national and non-national. It does not discriminate based on gender or on, the fact that somebody is in a country illegally, etc. It should not be conditional on supporting an investigation or collaborating with the authorities. And the primary purpose is really to protect and respect the rights of victims. Many a times it helps to actually break the connection between victims and their traffickers. And it also allows them the opportunity to receive all the information they need to receive in order to make an informed decision over whether they wish to collaborate with the authorities or not, and what will be their next course of action. This is particularly important because in many circumstances, victims are often involved in criminal offenses, which they may have been coerced into committing as a result of being trafficked. And it becomes very important that they are able to receive legal advice around their options and how to proceed and how to think about it. And that's one of the important reasons why this period exists. The support actually should be fairly comprehensive and tailored to the specific needs of the individual, including, considerations around their gender and age-sensitive services as well. And the support should not just be limited to immigration support. Legal advice is often very key for many individuals at this point. And also the needs vary. For some individuals, there are no acute needs to stay in a shelter as there are in other cases. And one sees that, different models of shelter or non-shelter based forms of care may be appropriate. The way one would treat a labor trafficking victim and address their needs may be very different to the way one would address a sex trafficking victim and the needs that they might have. It really needs to be a system that is responsive to the needs of victim, and it has to have built within it the flexibility to do that. Again, the period for a reflection and recovery period globally really varies from 30 days to actually 3 months or even 6 months in some countries. I wanted to give you an illustration of different jurisdictions around the world. So if you look at Thailand, for example, there is an option of 24 hours plus up to 7 days. And it is not contingent on assisting the authorities, but the presumed victim has to undergo victim ID, which actually requires often a degree of collaboration with the authorities. And the main purpose is victim identification in this case, but support is provided. And in the UK, it's 30 days. And you'll see that in Norway, it's up to 6 months. The primary purpose, as you see, is usually victim recovery and informed decision as to whether to cooperate with the authorities and their own protection, etc. And in Denmark, the primary purpose there is to actually really focus on migration control, and it's very focused on repatriation. You'll see that residence permit is provided in many cases following a reflection and recovery period. Often this is contingent on collaborating with a criminal investigation or consenting to act as a prosecution witness. And you'll see that, in the last column, the support and protection is not conditional on undergoing a victim ID process in most cases. But in some cases, there needs to be a consent to actually go through the system. It is actually the right process to take informed consent of people to engage in this. There's a lot of debate around it, but trafficking is a process that really disempowers people. It takes away their ability to choose, and it takes away their ability to exercise their own agency. The idea of introducing the consent of the individual and the informed consent is that individuals should be given the ability to make their own decisions and to exercise their own agency over what happens to them next. Now, what are some of the opportunities and challenges in implementing reflection and recovery periods? One, it helps to actually improve a victim-centric approach to identification and protection of presumed victims. The degree of collaboration, if individuals are allowed the time to reflect and recover, is often much higher. It reduces the stress and psychological impact of the identification process on the individual. This can be a really taxing time, because I know there is a perception that people are rescued, and when they are in this sort of reflection and recovery period, they are deemed to be safe and out of harm's way. But actually, that's the beginning of yet another journey, which can often be a very, very stressful journey for individuals as well, as they are trying to recover, but also engage with a very complex process of the criminal justice system. It allows opportunity for victims to really participate with and engage with the legal process. And if you actually give people the time to reflect and recover, there's a better chance that they would collaborate and that the quality of the evidence obtained would be much better, and engagement with the criminal justice system would be better. It reduces the practice of making support for presumed victims conditional on cooperation with the authorities. If one respects the real integrity and value of a reflection and recovery period, it becomes less pressured to actually make it conditional on cooperation with the authorities. It improves the presumed victims' trust and confidence in the authorities, and therefore their willingness to engage and the quality of information. And it also gives the opportunity to develop very distinct adult and child-specific streams, which is really important. Again, we are trying to create and think about systems that are responsive to the needs of victims. Now, what are some of the challenges that one often sees? Authorities are often reluctant to offer unconditional support and protection. They have a job to do, they have an agenda to fulfill, and they need to be getting investigations and prosecutions underway. If somebody is not willing to participate or to collaborate, there is a real challenge around offering unconditional support. And this reflects a bigger underlying problem, where victim identification is often tied to the value of that individual as a witness, as a potential prosecution witness, or their value to the criminal justice system. Once again, we must remember that victims of trafficking are individuals whose rights have been violated, and that's how they should be responded to, taking a victim-centric approach, as opposed to thinking of them as pawns of the criminal justice system. And if people are actually treated as individuals whose rights have been violated and given the space, the time and the support and the advice that they need, they will actually engage with the criminal justice system. But one must not link the victim identification process with the provision of support, with the reflection and recovery period. That's quite dangerous to do. It really requires a change in mindset from law enforcement and support service providers. And again, when one is considering, one must reconsider shelter-based care as the primary mode of support for presumed victims in order to effectively implement a reflection and recovery period. It may well be that victims will be reluctant to agree to a reflection period because they fear prolonged stays in shelters. If you think about some labor trafficking victims, many of them have debts to pay, many of them have remittances to send home, and they just want to be able to get back to work. And, in respect of that, and where there are no fears for their security and no risks to them personally, it may be that it is much better to consider alternative care to shelter-based care in particular. And of course, this will not be appropriate in all cases and must be decided after a careful risk assessment. And of course, having a reflection and recovery period of any duration of time requires resource commitment. And support services need to be provided. And if it is a shelter-based care model that is being applied, then there is a real need to ensure that the resources are available and that certain minimum standards of care are being provided. But by and large, in jurisdictions where there is a national referral mechanism and where a reflection and recovery period is provided as part of this system, it is proven to promote better engagement of victims with the criminal justice system. So it's not that the agenda of victim care and taking a victim-centered approach is actually different or, at separate ends or diverging from what the law enforcement agenda is. Not at all. In fact, everybody wants to get to the same place. It's just that different modes and different routes are taken. But the primary consideration has to be victim care and protection. And within that concept, where this is respected, one will naturally see a building up of trust and a building up of a better engagement with the criminal justice on the victim's behalf. So I think my time is up. I was tasked with setting the scene. I hope this gives you a little bit more clarity around what a reflection and recovery period is. And I'll hand it back over to you, Darlene. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Archana, for a brief but very comprehensive presentation. And of course, you provided us a clearer picture about the reflection and recovery period. It is very interesting actually to see the different reflection periods you've shared being applied in other jurisdictions and the purposes they have and attached contingencies for some jurisdictions. And I like that you highlighted on the informed consent of victims, no? Even if when we are providing services to the victims. Our next speaker is a social worker by profession. She spearheaded the advocacy campaign against child trafficking in Zamboanga City. That's a city down south of the Philippines. And that was way back in 2004. She was also instrumental to the drafting of Philippine human rights guidelines for the protection of trafficked children, which has been adopted by the Philippine Interagency Council Against Trafficking. She wears many hats. She is the chairperson of the Philippines Against Child Trafficking National Council, a professor of the College of Social Work and Community Development of Western Mindanao State University, and founder of the KKI Tanglay Buhay Center for Children, Victims, and Survivors of Human Trafficking. Please welcome Dr. Marcelina Carpizo. Doc Marcy, you have the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Fiscal Darlene. So, good afternoon, good day to everyone. So, allow me to share to you my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, is this visible?
Yes, we can see it clearly. And can you just speak a little bit louder?
Okay, okay,
Okay, that's
okay, thank
better.
you so much. So, I would like to share our strategies, approaches, as well as good practices as far as the Philippines is concerned, particularly the Tanglao Buhay Shelter, which is based in Zamboanga City, Philippines. So, for 15 years, we have been working with the shelter. So, the Tanglao Buhay Shelter is a shelter exclusively for girls who are victims, survivors of trafficking. So it was established in 2008 with the following objectives. One is to increase the child's sense of safety and security, attend to child's psychological emotional needs, sponsor child's education, support child's need for legal assistance, prepare family and community reintegration of the child, engage in advocacy campaign, and of course, to promote a personal development program focusing on the six dimensions, which is the physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual moral. Now, In the Philippine context, particularly based on our experiences, when we say reflection, we always consider this as a stage where a child is provided a space, or so to speak, a time to breathe, think and adjust and decide on the next steps to take while recovering from the experiences, especially with regards to pursuing legal actions against her perpetrator or perpetrator. So when we talk also about recovery, this is the time wherein the child is assisted to start getting her balance back or to bounce back, to adjust to her new situation and continue with life as normally as possible. So this is through possible with all the different interventions of the shelter. So when you talk about reflection, I would like to emphasize that upon the arrival of the child in the center, they are introduced to the girls, and a brief orientation is given to them to help them settle down and begin adjusting to the new environment. And then this is where trust building is also very important. So, based on the Tanglaw Buhay shelter experience working with children not only based in Zamboanga but in other parts of the country, when we talk about reflection, this entails a process, a stages, wherein the focus of this is to address the different issues that hamper the child's progress. As I mentioned in the six dimensions, the physical issues, the mental issues, the social, emotional, spiritual, and moral. And take note, the focus of this reflection or this process is on the child, not on the programs we can offer, but on the child, particularly on who she is, what she wants, and what she can do to address her situation. Along the way, this approaches or this process is being accompanied with giving the continuous access of the child to the different services of the center. So when you talk about access to justice, very well, we have been practicing this as part of the reflection to really consult the child. We never, in our experience, force a child to file a case. So always the decision lies on the child whether the child is willing to file a case or not. But to help the child decide on this, usually what we do is we provide an orientation on the pros and cons whenever they file a case. We have to lay down the cards on the table so they will decide, they will be helped to decide whether they will pursue the case or not. So, as you can see on the screen, we talk about the possible consequences that she may experience, like being harassed by the defense lawyer, being asked the same question repeatedly by the defense lawyer to confuse or discredit her testimony during court litigation, and many more. And after that, we will give time to the child to reflect on again. And then there's always what we call a time for reflection for every child in the center. And in most cases, it's the child. When we have our one on one approach with a social worker and with a psychologist, it's now the child who would really tell us, Mom or Ate, that's in the Philippines, they call Ate, I am ready now to file a case, or I'm ready now to participate or engage in whatever investigation that will entails. And as you can see in the screen, the photos above, this shows one of our activities, and we call this the court awareness session. All children in referred to our shelter is exposed to what we call the court awareness sessions, wherein, as you can see, they are being exposed to the real court room, and then the judge or the lawyer or the fiscal will tell them what will happen, where they're going to sit. So, in other words, this will somehow help them to really decide whether to go on with the case or not. Now, talking about what is the minimum, what is the maximum, I would like to always say that it depends on the child, depends on the severity of the experiences of the child, because they are all traffic victims, but we know they have different severity or exposure to the traumatic experiences. Another, it depends again on the resiliency of the child. There are some children who could always bounce back on the first day, just like the first case that we have on the very first day, and then the child really said, I want to pursue the case, I am willing to go to the police station, so on and so forth. So it depends on the resiliency of the child. But anyway, more or less based on our experiences, the minimum reflection period is 1 week, and the maximum period is for 1 month. Along the way in the reflection period, is this is also accompanied with our recovery programs. It is very crucial indeed that we always journey with the child from the very beginning that they were referred to us, providing them a positive atmosphere, a home like atmosphere will definitely help them reflect, and it will help them also recover. So, based on our programs and services, the shelter is providing 24 hours, a shelter that is exclusively for traffickers. And we provide a home like atmosphere. The gate, it's not that high, and they are free to go to school. They are being accompanied by their older what's this older girls that were also trafficked, so on and so forth. And a part of this 24 shelter is we provide different psychosocial intervention. So the social workers and the psychologists work together. This is really very crucial. And then we also provide educational services for those who are willing to continue with their schooling or undergo non-formal education. We also provide part of the recovery program is livelihood program for those older children. I say older children who are already 15 years old but have just gone grade 1 or grade 2. So should they decide to undergo livelihood program or vocational vocational training, they are allowed to do this. And of course, part of this is access to justice. Let me just emphasize, part of this recovery program is some of the sessions that I have posted here, like letting go of the things that cause me pain, this relapse process, self-worth, how I see myself. This is really very important. And again, this is a process. This cannot be done only for 1 or 2 sessions. Again, it depends on the child. Tapping our inner resources, key to meeting life's challenges. So all of these interventions really are very helpful and very much connected to the reflection process, where they were, if they will go if they will with this file cases or not, or cooperate with the law enforcers. Going on to the reintegration, again, I would like to emphasize again, reintegration depends on the case of the child, depends on a case-to-case basis. Every child is unique. Although we have a program ready for them, but it's not applicable to everyone. So that's why we have a separate case conference. So as you can see in the reintegration program, that we have this a moment together. A moment together, this is for the parent who are, of course, not part of the trafficking cases. And then there's what we call the family reconnections for those who are not victims of trafficking or for those who are not part of trafficking. We have also this family advocacy campaign or family enhancing sessions, because we really wanted that whenever we reintegrate children back to their family, we are not just preparing the child, we need to prepare the family themselves and even the community. So as you can see here, part of our services on the community and family reintegration is the family tracing. The shelter is just but a temporary space for our children. The shelter is just a temporary home for the children while they are still reflecting whether to pursue the case or not. A temporary shelter for them really to be recovered, and a space where they will be accompanied for their successful reintegration. So we do family tracing. We do family counseling because we know very well the success of reintegration, so children will not be re-victimized again. We really use the holistic approach, the family approach, wherein every family members must be part of the reintegration process. And of course, as I mentioned, the family advocacy sessions, and we do family and community needs assessment. In other words, here, whenever the child ready to be reintegrated, we do series of assessment whether the family is ready, whether they are economically, socially, in all aspects are ready to uh, to get back their own children. And of course, a series of case conference with partners turn over to parents monitoring and follow up. And you can see when I would just like to emphasize before my time is out already here in the monitoring and follow up, it's very clear that there is what we call the release paper, or is an agreement, a mutual agreement between the parents and the social worker in the center, that the moment they will take over the child, that they have really to protect the child, so on and so forth. Should they fail to do that, the center has the right to get back the child. Now, for the last slide, we have some challenges. Working in a working with children in the shelter actually is a very big challenge. So one of our challenges is the lack of family support during recovery, access to justice, and reintegration. Another one is aftercare. This is always our problem because if we do good here in Zamboanga City with our government, so on and so forth, but when they go back to their places of origin, the lack of support is not provided by the local government and other stakeholders to include the family. And definitely they will be re-victimized again. And of course, whenever children don't have complete details of their parents and whereabouts, and if they want part of the exhibit when you file a case is their birth certificate, so this is always a problem. The slow justice system in the country, I'm sorry really, but this is the reality. Some of our children really got married already, but still, no, there were no conviction as far as children cases filed in our city. And then interference of some service providers and government officials just really to make a settlement, amicable settlement is being a challenge also to us. And of course, the popularization of the anti-trafficking law, including the recovery program, especially in remote areas, are not being known to everyone. So this is a danger now, wherein children or victims of trafficking, in terms of protection, okay, they will be more at risk. And of course, the sustainability of the center. We could not really tell the children, stop eating, tomorrow we will not eat, but rather you could always say we will not have a training tomorrow. And the recommendations is the institutionalization of the ATIP program at the local government units, because so far as I know, as far as Zamboanga is concerned, we have our local ordinance and with fundings. I don't know with the other um, cities or provinces, municipalities in the Philippines. I hope they have also. And of course, the identification and protection of, in other words, the provision of basic services to the children must not be a requirement if they are not willing to file a case. So far, this is all. Thank you so much. Back to you, Fiscal Darling.
Thank you very much, Doc Marcy. I wish we could give you more time. No, thank you for that very focused presentation on reflection and recovery period involving a child victim. And I think I got one highlight is the good collaboration with the prosecutor and the courts and the comprehensive services they received during such period. And as you noted, although you provided a minimum and a maximum period, but as you said, that there is really no fixed rule because it really depends on the experience and the resiliency of the child. So again, thank you. Our third speaker is the Director of Psychology Services at the Blue Dragon in Vietnam. She has provided therapeutic interventions and trauma treatment for more than 600 girls and women who have survived human trafficking into sexual slavery. For the past 14 years, she has provided psychosocial and trauma-informed services to survivors of human trafficking, child victims of sexual abuse, and street kids. She uses her extensive experience from the front line to inform Vietnam's university curriculum in psychology and the development of the psychology profession. Please welcome Ms. D. Timin Chao. The floor is yours, Ms. Chow.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Danine, for your welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Châu Ding. Um, I am psychotherapist. I have been working for Bhutan Foundation for 14 years. Bhutan Children Foundation is an international organization to support street kids, um, child sexual abuse, and survival of human trafficking. Today, I am so happy to share with you about how Bhutan support the survival of human trafficking in reflection and recovering their traffic. Um, I would like to talk to you about one story of Hoa, the survivor who was trafficked when she was 17 years old. To make you more understand about how Bhutan support the survival of human trafficking in reflection and in reflection and recovering their trauma or their difficulty or their challenge after their trafficking. Why why the girl who live in the small village in the north of Vietnam. Her parents were divorced and she lived with her mom and her young sister. She had to quit school because of poverty, and she have a thought she need to earn money to support her younger sister to keep study at school. One of her relatives come to talk to her about one opportunity to get a job with well paid so she can able to support her younger sister. She trusts her relative and follow her relative to to find a job. Finally, she found out she was trafficked in China, and she had to be married with one man. She very worried and she didn't want to do, but she was beaten by the trafficker, and she had to agree. Um, at the first time in the husband family, she tried to run away, yeah, and but she not success, and she was beaten more, and she was locked in the room. She recognized she need to uh, learn language and to discover uh, the place that she is living. If she want to run away, or if she need to call for help. After 3 years living in the slavery, she got success in rescuing with support from Bhutan team. On the first day she landed to Vietnam, she cries a lot because she knows she can live again. Yeah. She received the support from Bhutan Care in emergency support. We call it emergency support because on that time she have reflection, she have time to think about uh, to calm down, to think a little bit about her future, some difficulties, some challenge she might to face when she come back home. She also need the nutrition. She also need the health check with the long time 3 years in China with the very difficulty circumstance to live with the husband family, and she also need the legal advice because uh, 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 she was trafficked by one of her relative, so she quite nervous and she not sure about she need to report to the police or how she would do because she afraid if she report to the police, maybe her family, her mom, her younger sister will be in danger, but of someone. Um, so the legal advice in that state and the and the psychosocial support is really important on that period of time. Uh, we work very closely with her. We very we share with her a lot of things related to the gory and challenging on her thinking, and after that she make the decision on reporting to the police about the trafficker. After 2 weeks living in our emergency safety accommodation, she can go home. She very happy and she think her life will be better and she have a new life. But in fact, it's not really like that. She she when she came back because she live in the small village, so every people in her village know her story, know her traffic
Mhm.
in story, and they made up a lot of story, very difficult and very awful story on her trafficking,
Mhm.
and a lot of stigma on the village, no friends. You can imagine about when she was in China. She had the big hope. She wants to her life to be normal like before. She have friends. She live in the village. Every people love her and care about her. And with that hope, will give her more power to run away. But when she come back to the village, nothing happened. Everything suddenly totally different with her hope. So she very disappointed. She very upset, and she think she might be die or something. Or she have a thought like she would stay in the China forever. Don't need to come back. Luckily, because the social worker and the psychologist at Bhutan um, work very closely with her and support with her every day, sharing, talking, and working with the plan for her. If she cannot live in the village, maybe another safety place can help her. So she decided to come back to Hanoi, where Bhutan can have more resources to support her, and she came up with a plan to take vocational training and to be hairdresser. Uh, After 6 months to take the course, she become more independent and she graduate with her vocational training courses, and she worked in a hair salon. So you can see for uh, the recovery state is take quite a long time and with a lot of
Mhm.
challenging on that.
Right.
Like a way sometimes it's very deep and sometimes it's have hope. With Hoa story, Bhutan believe mm, the psychosocial model with the survivor approach is still the best practice to support the survival of human trafficking to to recovering their trafficking. And um, and during that time, the collaboration between social workers, psychologists, legal advisor is very close and really provide the comprehensive support for the survivor. The secondly important thing, the fund need to be flexible, because for Hoa story you can see she when we rescue her, and after that we need to spend more than 2 years to support her with her recovery. And the fund is need to flexible because for some survivor they can use for education or vocational training, but for some other cases, our other survivors they cannot take for longer education, so they need have like the livelihood or some other support or support for the children to go to school. um, and the last one, Lieutenant thing is good. It's about the peer support. Do you think the former survivor who have been success with Bhutan support, they can come back to support for the new survivor who just landed to Vietnam, because even though the social worker or psychologist at Blue Dragon have a lot of experiences, a lot of knowledge on that, but for the deeply sympathy, for deeply understand the former survivor can do better, and they can collaboration, they can support, and they can work together to build up the self-esteem, to build up the hope, and they are the role model for the new for the new survivor to look at on them, and they are very success before, so the new survivor can, oh, I can do like that person. It's very good, good strategy to support the new survivor when they just come home. Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
I hope,
Thank
yeah, so I
yes.
hope the story will help you all about how Bhutan support the survivor on reflection and recovery, the human trafficking.
It's
Thank you.
actually very, thank you, Miss Chow. It's actually very inspiring to
นาง
hear
ชาวเนาะถือว่าเป็นประโยชน์หลายเนาะตัวอย่างที่เป็นรูปธรรมเนาะอันนี้ก็ว่าถึงความทนทาน
here despite the odds against her. And of course, thank you for sharing her journey with us, no? The survivor of her journey. And of course, the psychological model you mentioned as a good practice. And I was just wondering when you mentioned about the stigmatization when she came back, the privacy and confidentiality of the victim. How was that addressed in the whole model of services that you were providing? So just that question for you to think about. But thank you again for sharing. And on to our fourth, but certainly not our least speaker, calling in from Thailand. Our fourth speaker is also a social worker, senior professional
โด
level.
ยเฉพาะแมน
Okay. And he began his career in December 2003 as a social worker at the temporary shelter to help the vulnerable group and the victims of trafficking. In 2013, he became the Secretary of Director General.
สวัสดีครับครับ
Sawadika.
ขอบ
Good afternoon. I'd like to extend the thanks to ASEAN-ACT and greetings to the speakers as well as participants from all the countries in this region. Let me speak in Thai and share our experience in our approach in Thailand. I think reflection period and or reflection and recovery period is very important. As the speakers before me, the three speakers have talked about the protection and the support in psychosocial aspects for the survivors. I think these are very important in the protection and support for the victims. I think the very first and most important thing is the victim-centric approach. How we allow the victims to learn and be prepared to recover from the bad experience. It is very vital to make our protection process effective. As other speakers have also already mentioned this, I just wanted to say that in Thailand, we started to implement the reflection period in our process because many times we wanted the victims to have the reflection period, and sometimes we have victims who question the authorities because they don't think they are victims and they got some information that may not have been accurate. And in the short period of the process, sometimes victims were not able to make decisions or to recover from their situation. And the readiness to provide evidence or to tell their stories. Initially, when they encounter the officials, they may not be able to tell everything. Maybe they are among the traffickers, and we don't know people who come in to the rescue through the rescue, and the frontliners may encounter a group of people that we don't know whether in that group we have the traffickers among them or not. So reflection period is very important. It will allow the victims to think and to be separated from that. And in Thailand, we in reflection period and the National Referral Mechanism or NRM are closely related. And in the past, we have our referral process for services and the provision of a time, an appropriate time for the victims. And now we are thinking how to get all the relevant agencies and organizations in Thailand to play a role in this period of time, as well as referral and providing information about the assistance. And among our agencies, we had set up our working group in 2019 with government organizations, NGOs, and international NGOs that came together and figured out a way to review the situation in Thailand. As Ms. Achana talked about the reflection period in Thailand and the understanding of the 24 hours plus 7 days that is stipulated in the law. And we spent quite a bit of time to review and discuss about that provision. And in step two, organizations that work with us, including ASEAN-ACT, also stepped in to conduct studies and researches, learn from other countries, learn from the good practices in other countries, and try to find ways to adapt those learnings with our context. And we have the presentations of the findings, and we think we have enough findings that to go ahead. And we think we would have to propose this idea to the National Committee to have the policy moving forward on this implementation. And we think the NRM and the recovery and reflection period will be implemented hand in hand. And what would be helpful? We think it would be helpful to potential victims pending their victim identification, as well as the victims who've been identified. They will have this appropriate time period to gain confidence and to recover, because we will get different pieces of information when we encounter the victims, and we'll have several sets of information in the hands of different agencies. So how to get the victims or potential victims to receive services, as well as the time, enough time to get the services from the government, from service providers, whether or not they are victims in the first place. And they'll have time to heal from the trauma, from the physical injuries, and to get the correct information. We think the reflection period or reflection and recovery period would be the, the time that we will work on the trauma-informed, victim-sensitive, child-friendly approach, gender sensitivity, culturally appropriate approach, as well as addressing individual needs of the victims, and do no harm approach. The reflection period will allow officials to comply with all these principles. In Thailand, we set up our procedures before the victims get to the shelters. This is the protection process in the shelters. We, from the intake, when we admit the victims, we have a time for the victims to heal, to think, and during this time they can reflect and make decisions about their experience, and if they want to recover from the trauma and physical injuries. And during this time, we think the psychosocial recovery and the rights they're entitled to, and the right to claim compensation from the perpetrators, and to claim compensation from the anti-tip fund will be carried out during this time. And that is another protection and service that we provide to the victims. We are able to provide all this from the beginning that they get to the process until their reintegration to the society. And it will be a participatory process, including the reintegration. Many victims requested a seed money from the anti-tip fund to start a new life. And many of them would go and take over the family business so that the family can be supported further, so they don't have to start over from scratch. They can go out and plan and improve their livelihoods with the support and monitoring and evaluation, as well as following up. Another important thing is to plan the repatriation and reintegration that is safe and effective, because we know that starting a new life after being through the bad experience is not easy. Sometimes the communities understand, sometimes not. So before we send them back to reintegrate, we have to assess the readiness of the victims, the families, as well as the communities and service providers in that local area, to determine whether they have the resources necessary for the support at that place. And that is where the following up and evaluation comes in. And what kind of services and mechanisms they can get to if there's problem when they are back in the society. We have to plan this with the victims. And all in all, in the prosecution and social readiness, I think they are very important. And the reflection period before they get to the protection process will allow them to think and to learn that when they are in the shelters, what kind of services they will get and how much time they have, and they'll be able to get ready for what would come next. And in our shelters, we try to make them feel that in the shelters, it is a time of happy shelter with activities and interventions. And after they've been through the bad things, they're in a place where we have the recovery and support for them. For victims who come as a family or accompanied victims who have children, for example, and victims who would have to go out and work. What we are doing, and we want this principle to be recognized as a very important approach. We want to get every touch point with the victims most victim friendly, from victim identification, protection to reintegration in a sustainable way. If we can create this friendly, victim-friendly approach, it could be a period of time that make victims feel safe and confident in the officials. Sometimes victims are afraid of officials, the police officers and law enforcers that are intimidating, and they don't want to tell them anything. But if we can create victim-friendly services from the beginning to the end, we think we stand a good chance of success. And it is a big concern because sometimes victims cannot reintegrate truly. So we need to bring in the communities and ensure that communities are friendly as well. That is something that we are working on, and that would also align with our national referral mechanism that we are studying in parallel with the reflection period. And that is the last one would be the transnational referral mechanism. That's the thing that I would like to share with you. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Director Rajapon, for a very comprehensive presentation. Very informative to know about Thailand's policy and practice on the reflection period. And of course, what you've emphasized, that support to victims should not only be to the victims, but as well, should extend as well to their families. So thank you again. Let us now go back to the polls and check the results. Kem will post the results. Allow me again to read this results. So for purposes of translation, a reflection period grants traffic victims time to process the experience and whether to participate in any proceedings. In your experience, what do you think is a reasonable duration for a reflection period? So we have 38% who said that 3 to 6 months, followed by 27% at 1 to 3 months, and then 25%, 6 to 1 year, and not less than 1 year at 10%. Now, for this poll question, may we call on Director Rajapon and Arjana? May we invite you to give us a 1-minute reaction to that poll results for question number 1.
Do you want me to go first, Kun Ratchapon?
I think you
Okay.
be first.
Okay. So I don't think it's surprising that the higher proportion thought 3 to 6 months. I think everybody who works in this line of work understands that sometimes a period of 1 to 3 months is not enough. And, it's like shelters, who are under pressure to turn beds around every 3 months or 6 months. It's very, very difficult to adhere to that because you're dealing with real people with very complex problems. And very often at the end of, a short period of time, like 1 to 3 months, you're not where you need to be. So 3 to 6 months doesn't surprise me as the most popular response. And 6 months to 1 year, 25%, I think one needs to also consider the fact that a lot of resources are also engaged in this process. But having said that, when you're dealing with people and you're dealing, let's say, with a child, there has to be enough flexibility to adjust the system. And I saw there was a question in the chat about this as well, that what happens if the reflection period is not enough because of the circumstances of the individual. And any system that is victim-centric has to build in buffer for situations like this.
Thank you, Archana. I think that's really important to have a buffer for that. Yes, Director Rachapon?
ครับก็ในส่วนของ
Right. From my personal opinion, I think we can set a minimum time that it shouldn't be less than a month, but the actual time needed should be flexible and it should be dependent upon individual experiences, because one victim may be very resilient and maybe 2 weeks they can bounce back and be ready to go and fight. But personally, I think I would prefer a minimum time of no less than 1 month and no more than 3 months. Because what's most important is to enable victims to be reintegrated in a society, but depending on their unique experiences, what they have been through, that may vary, especially labor exploitation and sexual exploitation. Victims may have different stories altogether. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think from these poll questions, your reaction to these poll questions and what we've heard from all of you, I think there's a common message that victims have different experience, different resiliency level. Thus, the more appropriate support would really to have an individualized approach, kind of support to be able to really help them. So again, thank you very much for your reactions. Now we go to the second question. In your view, should provision of protective measures and resistance to traffic victims be conditioned on their cooperation to give evidence? We have 71% saying yes, 20% saying no, and around 10% saying somewhat. Can we invite Ms. Chow and Doc Marcy to give your 1-minute reaction to this results?
So I will start. Okay,
Yes,
so
please.
okay, thank you so much. So majority said yes.
Yes,
However,
Doc
based
Marcy, we don't hear you.
okay, I'm sorry. Okay, yes. Majority have answered yes, but we would like
We
to
still don't hear you. We'll get back to you, Doc Marcy. Miss Chow, can you go ahead?
Yes, so my personally, I think yes, because for the survivor when they are in reflection and in recovery, the protective measures and assistance to be the good condition for them to feel relaxed, to feel calm, and because I come from psychotherapy, so it make them more calmer, and it make them more have room in their mind to think about how is the best thing for them. And because for some reason after trafficking, time not most of the survivor living in the very difficult circumstance, and they always in the survival responding. They didn't have time to think and calm and know exactly what they want and how to assist them to be more calmer or to know well how it's good for them. So I think yes.
All right. Thank you, Miss Chow. Now we get back to Doc Marcy. I
Yes.
hope
Okay.
you have
Yeah.
better
Can you
audio.
hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay. Can you
Oh,
hear
we
me?
still don't hear Doc Marcy. That's
Okay.
unfortunate.
Can you hear me now?
Ah,
Can you hear me now?
we
What
don't
happened?
hear any sound.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Uh,
Okay.
They
Before we go back to Doc Marcy, Archana and maybe Director Ratchapan, maybe you would like to share your thoughts also in this your reaction to the second poll.
Thank you for asking, Darlene, because I was desperate to share my thoughts on this
Okay.
particular
Okay.
on this particular question. I mean, I entirely disagree with this because it is fundamental that victims are able to access protection and assistance without it being conditional on their ability to give evidence. It defeats the purpose of having a victim-centric approach, and it really damages the possibility of somebody to engage truly and meaningfully with the criminal justice system. So, it really, there has to be a decoupling. And we see very positive steps being taken in places like Thailand and some of the other jurisdictions in the ASEAN, where they're really trying to make an effort to separate these two. And it is really important that support and provision of assistance during a reflection period is not conditional on giving evidence, because these are individuals whose rights have been violated. They are not enforcement tools for the criminal justice system. Thank you.
Chiska, I would like
Thank you,
to try.
Archana, for clarifying. Um, Director Ratchapan, do you like to also share your thoughts?
ครับก็สั้
Right.
น
I will be quick. I agree with Achana. I think what is most important is that we find two groups of people, groups of potential victims and groups of victims who've been identified. And most of the victims will get services that are more comprehensive. But we are trying to ensure that those who get rescued will enjoy the services and the protection that are appropriate, most appropriate, and maybe in the long run that would be varied. But I agree with Achana that the fundamental protection and services should be accessed with no conditions upon being a witness. That should get the set of services that respond to their needs. And when they are ready to participate or to be the witness, to give evidence, they will get other rights according to the laws. But the basic, the fundamental services should be unconditional.
Okay. Thank you, Director Ratchapan, for your thoughts. And now, may I invite again Doc Marcy,
Yeah,
please?
am I audible now?
Yes, yes,
I
you are.
thank you so much. So I'm sorry, I completely disagree. One, you have to consider that the victims of trafficking are not criminals, and even criminals, they have the right to access services from the government and other services. Another thing, if everyone, all victims have the rights, particularly on our experiences with trafficked children, we are using the child rights based approach. So there is non discrimination whether you're coming from different tribes, different economic status. If they need our help, definitely we have to help them. And lastly is um, how will you be able to help them not to be re-victimized again if you will prevent them really from availing the services of the government and non-government? So there will be no successful litigation if we will not provide our support. So we have to journey with them from the very start to the end. Back to you, Fiscal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all your thoughts on the polls. I think that has brought a lot of something to think about for everyone. And we now proceed to our next part, which is a video. We will play a video of a child labor trafficking victim who was rescued when she was only 14 years old and was brought to a shelter. And a question was posted for her to respond. This is the question: how has the reflection period and the assistance provided help you decide to give a statement or testify? She gave this response. Let's listen to the video.
Dumating ako sa center year 2015. Kaya ko na kaya ipaglaban ang kaso na iyon dahil sa gusto ko maranasan niya ang sakit na naranasan ko. At willing din ako mag-file ng kaso against the employers kasi na-realize ko na hindi na pala magbayad pag mag-file ng kaso. At dahil din sa tulong ng center, na
Did we just lose audio? Cam, can you still hear audio? I think we just lost the audio. Can we maybe start? Yes.
Let's play that again, I think.
Yes. Can we just start from where we stopped? Sorry, there are some technical issues still.
While waiting
We
for
will-
the audio, Darlene,
We
would
will
you like to go? Sorry, go ahead, Darlene.
Yeah, okay. I was like mine's the Cam. I was thinking of going to the question and answer and go back to the audio video. We'll give you the floor, Cam, to maybe read a few questions in the chat box for our panelists.
Thank you so much, Darlene. A great discussion so far. And thanks to our speakers, Archana, Doc Marcy, Director Ratchaporn, and Chowdin. Archana, you answered, well, you almost responded to the first question from Alan. I think Alan is a prosecutor. Are there instances that the reflection period provided are consumed, yet the victim, due to horrific experiences and trauma, remains in shock or could not mentally facilitate and process the experience the victim went through? What happens then? Is the reflection period extended, and for how long is the maximum period that could be provided with support and protection? Archana, can I give this to you first, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you remember when I started my presentation, I said there are advantages to having a reflection period set down in the law and being detailed clearly, because you would expect that situations where, such as these, like in the question, would be addressed in the law. So for example, where the set reflection period or the minimum and maximum periods are not suitable in a particular case, given the personalized circumstances in that case, like for example here, that should be extended to respond to the needs of the individual. And I think, you know, that's the advantage of having this set down in the law. And in most places where there is no law, there is no clear policy around this, it becomes a matter of discretion and how much advocacy those who are engaging with the victim can do in order for them to stay in the system and to continue to avail protection until such time as they need it. But in many places, because of resources being so difficult, very often people are taken out of the support system because it's simply not possible to keep them in there. So there are very difficult questions of resources, etc., that arise. But the right thing to do is to actually personalize it to respond to individual needs, because there will be some cases that really challenge the time barriers set out in the system.
That's all well understood. Thank you so much, Archana. And can we now go back to the video? And I hope our team in Bangkok are ready to play the video once again. We had an internet connection issue over there, but luckily they are back now. So let's take a listen.
Dumating ako sa center year 2015. Kaya ko rin nakaya ipaglaban ang kaso na yun dahil sa gusto ko maranasan niya ang sakit na naranasan ko. At willing din ako mag-file ng kaso against the employers kasi na-realize ko na hindi na pala magbayad pag mag-file ng kaso. At dahil din sa tulong ng center, na-feel ko na safe ako at ang aking pamilya. Kaya nagawa ko mag-file ng case at nalaman ko din ang proseso ng magsasalita sa harap ng court. Dahil sa court awareness session namin na na-attendan ko na ng mga session, sa tulong din ng edukasyon, mas naintindihan ko ang kahalagahan ng pagsasalita or pag-testify sa sitwasyon na pinagdaanan ko. Ang masasabi ko lang po is dapat maging matatag tayo at huwag matakot kung ano man ang kinalabasan nito. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In the interest of time, we will request our speakers to give a 1-minute reaction to the video. Can we start with you, Archana?
Sure. So look, my view is this. I mean, it's very clear in this video that she has had the benefit of legal advice, support, and information around what the next steps should be, and that she felt empowered to use that in order to decide what comes next. But this is also not reflective always of the experience of most people going through the system. And, you know, there is also a dividing line between how much prepping around the court system and the criminal justice system should actually take place between the reflection and the recovery period, because it is meant to be a break where the victim is, of course, given information, but, you know, one needs to be careful not to be overly prepping them for the criminal justice process, because that's not the point of the reflection period. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Director Rachapon?
จริงๆมีความคิด
Actually, I agree again with Archana, because during the reflection period, what is important is for the victims to have time to think and to process. And it is a time for the victims to make peace with what happened. And well, giving information is a good thing, but giving an appropriate set of information would allow the victims to avoid being uncomfortable too much. And we have to kind of assess their readiness to receive information, how in-depth that is, or how big the information is. Maybe we can assess in periodically, first 2 weeks, for example, and after that.
All right. Thank you, Director. Ms. Chow, please.
Yeah, for myself, I think reflection and recovering is very important to support the survivor of human trafficking, to have them more independent or develop and have better life. So during the reflection, it's really important for the psychological support to them, because with my experiences, a lot of survivor who have a lot of trauma and who have a lot of the trafficking related to someone they love, or someone belong to their family. So it's very important and very difficult for them to prove to report to the police about uh, how you see. So the psychological support and legal advice on that period of the time is very important. And for the recovery, it take time, and it's different with each survivor. Someone needs some months, but for someone need for a year, or maybe even for 10 years. So I think we need to flexible, and we need to respect their hearing. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you to Ms. Chow. And maybe also invite Dr. Marcy to give your reaction.
Yeah, thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. The video shared a while ago about a victim of human trafficking is a clear manifestation that the interventions of the center was very effective in the sense that the child was the one who decided that she is willing to file a case against the perpetrator. Again, it's another reflection or another manifestations that is always the decision of the child that is being followed and always taken into consideration the best interest of the child. And of course, along the way, not only during the filing of the case and even during the testimony, the psychologist, particularly the social worker, accompany them. So this is really a holistic approach. And lastly, it depends on the child. So it's a unique case, you know. Every child is unique. So every approaches is also unique. That's why we have really to deal with them individually. Okay, back to you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Doc Marcy, and thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts. Indeed, we go back to the informed consent that we give importance to that, and the support services that follows, no, if they consent to it. I just like to read a comment on the chat box from Prosecutor Lastimoso. He said, reflection and recovery is actually a healing stage to make the victim whole again, enabled, empowered, and capacitated to make wise decisions. So we'll close this session with that and move on to the Q&A again. I'll give the floor back to Ken.
Thank you so much. And I'll have to get Director Rachapun ready because I will throw this next question to him, having asked our channel already the first question while waiting for the video to come up. Director Rachapun, I'm going to rephrase a question from Araceli, asking about the better way for victims to cooperate with law enforcement. Instead of asking that, I'm going to rephrase Araceli by asking that when there is a trust deficit against law enforcers and the criminal justice system in a country, does the reflection period for victims become even more important? And how will the victims deal with the issue of a trust deficit against law enforcement agencies and the justice sector? Director Rachapon, please.
That's a very difficult question because many times we found that from the victim's perspective, from our experience taking care of the victims, some victims have had negative experience and perception with the law enforcers. But what is important is that during the reflection period, the reflection period would allow them to be more confident, and the key point would be the social workers who would come in, work with the victims and explain about what would be going on next, and perhaps to show the victims when they are ready to receive information that is relevant, for example, about the roles and responsibilities of different agencies along the process and how they will play a role in empowering the victims. I believe that currently law enforcers have adjusted their approach and they have become more victim centric. And especially in Thailand, investigators prosecutors are really sensitized about traumas, and they're really victim centric. And we work in a multidisciplinary manner to create trust and confidence among the victims, to show them that the process is there to help them and not to re-traumatize them due to what we wanted to work.
Thank you so much, Director Rachapon. I think the question was not difficult for you because you answered it quite really well. And this question now I'm going to ask Dr. Marce from participant Dr. Cora Dalangin. I think Dr. Marce, Dr. Cora is asking, what are the factors that you consider when providing protection services for children victims of trafficking?
Yeah. Yeah, come again. So what are the, come again?
What are the factors that you consider when providing protection services to children victims of trafficking?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. There are different factors that we have to consider. As I mentioned, every child referred to our center is unique. So there are cases wherein there are some children who could easily adjust or adapt to the new environment. And then, but there are other children, despite that they have been staying in the center for 1 month or 2 months. So this is where now we provide intensive healing program. Originally, or in most cases, we provide series of counseling because we have psychologists in the center apart from the social workers. But there are instances wherein there are some children who were really traumatized because of their experiences. So we have to provide intensive counseling. And other factors that we have also to consider in providing protective services also is in terms of severity of, shall I say, in terms of, yeah, severity of the trafficking cases, or particularly if the cases are really being the perpetrators are really coming from high ranking officials. So we have always to see to it that every minute or every inch of the day that there is what is protection that is provided. So in other words, when we provide protection services to our children, we have to look at them, we have to deal with them individually. That is why we have an individual case conference with them, and we deal with them according to their actual situation. So you will always start where they are, what is available, or what their present situations. I hope I was able to answer your question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marcy. Yes, I think you were able to answer that question. Now I'm going to ask our speaker, Madam Chow, please. This question may be for you, since you talked about earlier about the stigma against victims of trafficking. An anonymous attendee asks that what happens if some or few members of the community discriminates the victim after being rescued? Some may treat the victims as they're not welcome in the society or in the community, and people will not like them. And so how do we deal with this circumstance?
Yeah, thank you for that question. My experience is it really depends on the case. So for Hua's story, because she lives in the small village, and every people in the village knows know her story, know her comeback after trafficking. So not much for the detail the story, but they made up the story, and what they made up the story will affect to survivor to Hua, because normally they made up the story related to their knowledge and their thinking and the and maybe their culture as well. So for Hua's story, all of the people didn't knows about the trafficking. They just think she disappear and then she come back, and they didn't know what did happen with her before. So they just made up the story like talk back on her. So for some community like that, because of stigma from the community, so because I talked to you before, the survivor have the big hope about they then life will become normal like before they trafficking. But But in reality, no, everything is totally different. A lot of challenging, a lot of difficulty they have to facing with that. So for one, she's still facing with poverty. She didn't have any friend in the village because all of the friends got married or go to work out of the village because after 4 years in China, totally different. Uh, so for that case, the social worker and the psychologist work more closely with her. We have some technique or psychotherapy to help them to recover their trauma and to build up her trust, to build up the hope on the reality.
Thank you so much, Madam Chow. Yes, you highlighted the need to work with social workers, maybe psychotherapists. Would also be a way to help provide protection services to victims of trafficking, even as they experience stigma in the community. Now, circling back to Archana, the next question will be for you. But before that question, I'd like to read this comment from Wilma Batan that she says that reflection period is a self-healing, self-empowerment period. It allows the victim to prepare oneself to be mentally, emotionally, psychologically stable enough to face whatever challenges from anyone or any time. Whether there will be opportunity for services and assistance, the important thing is the victim will survive and start all over again. Thank you so much, Wilma, for that comment. I think our speakers and myself will agree with you. So now, Archana, the question for you is, again, just reading from one of the questions from one of our participants, paraphrasing it, is there, quote unquote, a good way to encourage a victim participate in the criminal justice process, Archana?
I think this is almost a rhetoric question there. And you know, I would say that it is absolutely vital that you give people the information, the space, and the support they need, and trust that they will do right by themselves and by the system. Because I think if you really give people a chance to get mental, physical help, and to be safe, and to be secure, to be fed, and to be given legal advice and support, they will be able to arrive at a decision for what to do next. And if indeed, you know, that is the point at which the best outcome can be achieved in terms of developing trust and building cooperation with law enforcers. If you take that away from that individual, you reduce the chances of building that trust and cooperation with law enforcers. So I would really suggest that the best way one can build this trust and continue to building on it and get better results is treat people as people who are victims of crime, whose rights have been violated. Focus on their needs. By focusing on them, they're better able to do what may be right for them first and for the system as well.
Thank you so much, Archana. Well said. And I think Elmer, one of our participants, say that an informed witness, a cooperative witness, and stakeholders must show that they care and everything follows smoothly. I think without much as expecting for the victim to become a witness in her or his case, we should still provide services, and reflection period must also be available for them, of course, depending on the legal mechanisms within a particular jurisdiction. And I think, Darlene, I have consumed most, if not all, of the questions from our participants, and I'm ready and happy to give the floor back to you, Darlene.
Thank you very much, Ken, for facilitating the Q&A part. And it is really good to also read comments from our participants. So thank you for your questions and your comments. And of course, to our panelists, we have ended the Q&A on a high note. And staying on that, I would like to invite all of you to again take the floor and give us 1 minute takeaway for our participants, that takeaway that you would want them to remember from this webinar. So to reverse we'll start now from Archana, and so followed by Ms. Chow, Director Rap Japan, and Doc Marcy.
That wasn't reversing it. I still started first. Okay, never mind. We'll do it first. I think, I'd like to say that the whole anti-trafficking movement was actually born out of the Palermo Protocol, which did not take birth in the traditional human rights system. It came from the anti-corruption, border security, sort of law enforcement, crime and sort of border control movement. And it is, however, important to remember that underlying the offense of trafficking is a series of violations of rights that go back to the very heart of the human rights system. If one is to take this approach, then the rights-based approach becomes the most important way of engaging with and of dealing with victims of trafficking in order to even get them on the path of restoration of some sorts. So the key takeaway is, think about an individual who's a victim of crime whose rights have been violated. Do right by them first, and don't assess their value in terms of them being part of a criminal justice system, or their value as a witness, or the fact that they need to be prepared for identification or investigation. And if you do that, you do right by the person, everything will follow after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Archana. And I like to remember that do right by them. I think that's fully, it's a loaded statement. And let's invite Ms. Chow, please.
Yes, I think for me normally people think yeah, when we rescue someone, they have better life. But no, not at all. They have another difficulty as well. So long term support is very important, and survivor center approach is always the best practice that the people thinks about that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chow. So I think I'll remember that to survivor centric approach. And now let's call Director Rajapon, please.
สำหรับผมนะครับผมคิดว่า
For me, I think what is most important is the understanding, the practitioners' understanding of the victims as someone who've been through horrific experiences. And we are there to support them to go through that crisis. And if we have the understanding and we can work with them, treat them well, that would be most effective. And we have to be empathetic.
Thank you so much, Director Rajapon. And Doc Marcy, please.
Okay, so once again, I would like to leave this message to everyone, particularly our students. I have seen a lot of students here, and of course, the other participants. We should always remember there is no such thing as a willing victim. They are all victims of circumstances. So I hope we will be able to advocate this in our own areas, because in reality, there are other law enforcers who still believe that it's the fault of the victims. So again, there is no what's this willing victim, but there are victims of circumstances. And always remember, it takes a village to protect a child from all forms of abuses, particularly human trafficking. Lastly, to be very successful in our rescue and our reflections on and so forth, what is needed is a tender, loving care. Back to you, Fiscal.
Thank you so much, Doc Marcy. So as Director Rajapon said, understand the victims. And what you've said is there is no willing victims. And I think these are all related. And of course, to treat them with tender, loving care. So thank you again. And before we close this session, I just like to read one more comment from our participants. Thank you for sharing, Wilma Batan. During reflection, victims learn to trust oneself so they can trust others who will offer services and assistance. So again, thank you everyone for your discussion and for the very well thought questions and sharing of comments. Uh, and then, of course, excellent discussion and advice from our esteemed panelists. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your generous sharing today. Now, to formally close our webinar, may I invite our team leader, Dr. Lucia Pietropoli, to officially close this webinar. Dr. Lucia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Darlene. Firstly, given the sensitivity of this content shared today, I would like to remind everybody that if these materials presented in this webinar raised any issues for you, please do access psychosocial support. If you're not sure how or where to access this support, please do let us know and we will point you in the right direction. I would like to thank everybody today for an excellent discussion, which really broadened our perspectives on the reflection and the recovery period. We have heard how the process can maximise the prospects for victims of trafficking to recover and start to rebuild their lives, as well as it increases their willingness to participate in criminal proceedings, whilst minimising the psychological stress on victims, as well as the prospects of re-traumatisation. As we've heard from our esteemed speakers, whether victims are, slow down, sorry, let me slow down. As we've heard from our esteemed speakers, whether we're dealing with victims of sex trafficking or labour trafficking, all victims require time to start to recover, process their thoughts and feelings, and think about their options going forward. The exact time that individuals will need, as well as the services and the support that they will require, will vary greatly based on their situation. But I think what was very clear and consistently stated by all of our speakers today is that victims should be afforded the time, the space, and the support that they need, and that this period should not be used for the purpose of gathering information for trial. It should not be used to negotiate repatriation or deportation, and it should not be used to detain victims or pressure them in any way. Some of the key takeaways from all of our distinguished speakers from me included the need to ensure that the reflection period is wholly victim-centred and the need to re-empower individuals who have had their autonomy and freedom taken away. We also heard that there is clearly no one size fits all when it comes to the reflection period, and that we need to design our systems and services to accommodate the specific needs and preferences of the victim. As we heard from Dr. Marcy, there are very practical ways to ensure that support is tailored and appropriate to the needs of the victim. Although Dr. Marcy focused on children particularly, I think everything that you said was actually relevant to the adult population as well. This process needs to start with building trust and getting to know the individual who requires support. I really liked what you said by starting with the individual and their needs, not starting with the service provider and the programs available. This is an important message for us all to remember. We also discussed the challenges in setting a timeframe for the reflection period, as every victim's experience is quite different. And from Dr. Chow, we heard that for many victims, the recovery period will really just start at the end of the reflection period, and that the recovery process is not linear, and that we need to invest in long-term support for victims to eventually support them to lead meaningful, safe and productive lives. We heard from Machana that there is a clear and proven link between victim protection and their willingness to participate in criminal proceedings, and that the better supported victims provide better quality evidence. And we heard from Chow a very powerful story that highlights how complex the process of rescuing and supporting victims are. It also highlighted that it's not always possible to talk about reintegration. Sometimes it's about starting a new life and integrating into a new community. And finally, from Dr. Ratchapon, we heard about the importance of a national referral mechanism in coordinating the appropriate support for victims at the time when they need it. He also stressed that the review and reflection period needs to provide a positive experience and environment for victims.
I do hope that the discussion today has been as useful for you as it has been for me, and that these learnings will serve to implement the adoption of more tailored responses for victims, which are informed strongly by psychosocial and rights-based approaches. I would like to thank all of our distinguished speakers again for generously sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us. And I'd also like to thank all of our interpreters for the excellent job they have done in conveying these complex topics to a very broad audience. And finally, to my own team, who have tirelessly worked throughout this year, not only to deliver this webinar, but a series of 10 to a very professional and also accessible standard. I'd like to say thank you so much. Whilst this looks like a very natural conversation, a lot of hard work and planning goes into making these events run so smoothly. While this is our final webinar in our series of 10, rest assured that we will be back next year with a fresh series on webinars covering different emerging issues in trafficking in persons. We very much look forward to seeing you all in 2022. Have a great break. And again, on behalf of ASEAN-ACT, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Couldn't agree with you more. The discussion today has indeed broadened our perspectives. I personally have also learned a lot. It was such an insightful and robust discussion. And yes, we hope to see you again next year. Please accept our warmest appreciation, Arjana, Doc Marcy, Ms. Chow, and Director Ratchapon, participants, and of course, my co-moderator, Kim Siguan, who's just across me, and ASEAN-ACT team behind the scenes who made this webinar possible. So just as a reminder, please kindly fill up the one-page feedback survey. The link is in the chat box. And for those questions, in case there are still questions that we missed, as I mentioned earlier, this Zoom webinar is being recorded. It will be uploaded in our portal. So if there are questions that were missed, we would also upload the question and answer in that same portal for you to be able to just click on the link and check on the webinar. So we definitely, we will also wait for your feedback. We really love to hear your feedback. Your comments are important and they matter to us. Your certificate of attendance will be sent to you on the email that you address that you have provided in the survey. So please take the time to complete the one-page survey. And then have a happy holidays. It's almost Christmas, and hope to see you next year. And stay safe, everyone. Thank you, Lucia.